All right, so we are gathered here today to receive teachings on the parting from the four types of clinging, which is composed, written down by the third patriarch, Jetsun Dragpa Gyaltsen. So I'm here today because Gaden Shartse Monastery told me that Dro-Phen Ling, the center of Dro-Phen Ling in Singapore, were requesting me to visit and give teachings. And therefore, I have come here sent by the monastery and due to your request. I do not pretend that I have any high realizations. However, for the time that is allocated for these teachings, which is 4 sessions, I feel confident that I can present the entire text. Now, before we begin with the actual teachings, it is good to understand the 4 major outlines that we will be following. So the first thing to explain is the purpose of listening to the teachings, like what is the benefit? Why should we be having these teachings? The second one is the attitude of the teacher, because there are certain things that the person communicating the teachings must follow and abandon. Then the third one is the way that the students, the listeners, should listen to the teachings. So the students, of course, they have to adjust their motivation and have the proper attitude when they participate. And then after that, we begin with the actual part, which is the instructions on these texts. Awesome. So we begin with the first thing that we need to mention, like what is the benefit of listening to the teachings, so studying the teachings. So if we're beginning by giving a quotation by Arya Sura from the Jataka Tales, the Garland of Births, he says, "Study is the lamp that dispels the darkness of delusion, the supreme wealth that cannot be carried away by thieves, a weapon that destroys the enemy of confusion." So with this verse, he actually identifies 3 benefits. So if someone is a real practitioner, then a proper practitioner should first of all recognize what are the objects of abandonment, things that we need to eliminate, and what are the objects of practice, things that we need to adopt as part of our everyday practice. And in order to understand the distinction between these two and to thoroughly comprehend this, it is very important that we study the works of the Buddha, the teachings of the Buddha, and the treatises that comment on them. Because without studying on them, these subjects are not subjects that are easy to comprehend. We will not comprehend them, or we will not know them naturally, automatically, and so forth. So it is very important that we engage in study. By engaging in study, as the first benefit says, study is like the lamp that dispels the darkness of ignorance. So this is something that applies to any subject. So let's say you're learning the alphabet starting from A, B, C. So initially you don't know those letters and you rely on a teacher, and the teacher teaches you the alphabet. So straight away from learning about the letter A, you remove the ignorance, the darkness of ignorance that you have in terms of the first letter of the alphabet, and you have the knowledge that recognizes this letter, and so on and so forth. Then you build up with the entire alphabet, and then you build up your vocabulary and so forth. So this applies to every subject of knowledge, any object of study. So we start from the beginning, and little by little we eliminate our ignorance, and in this way we progress gradually and we become great scholars. So we become very knowledgeable on this particular subject. So this is what is said here. You know, if we study those Dharma topics, it has the benefit of our studies like the lamp that illuminates the darkness of ignorance. Lesson. Mm. So it's very important that we begin by mentioning what are the benefits of study, because if from the beginning you understand what will be the benefit of a particular activity, then of course that makes you very enthusiastic in engaging in this activity, and you will carry out the activity diligently. It will be good quality. For example, if someone were to employ you and says, look, I would like you to come and work with me. If you come and work with me for a month, or 5 hours today, whatever, you will receive such and such a salary. So when you understand the benefit, which in this case, in this example, is the salary, that makes you very enthusiastic, and you engage in your work. You do your work every day with great joy, because you're looking forward to the payday, right? You're looking forward to the benefit that will come from this activity. And with this in mind, we begin by mentioning what are the benefits of engaging in study. So we say the first benefit is that your study is like a lamp that dispels the darkness of your ignorance. But the thing is that if you understand these type of benefits, then what follows from that is that there will be enthusiasm, there will be aspiration, like you're aspiring to engage in those studies, and this will actually lead into faith towards the Buddhist teachings. And then from that study also, and in dependence upon your faith, you will come to understand the important things, the important points of discipline. So, for example, you will understand that if I were to kill or harm another sentient beings, that will lead into taking rebirth in the hell of Avicii. But if I were to protect the life of other living beings, this will result in me having a long life, free from illness, a long and healthy life, and so forth. So by understanding those important points, that makes you follow or engage ethical discipline. Then, once you understand these points really well, it means that you can actually explain them to others. And by giving teachings to others, you become a Dharma teacher. And this becomes the activity of generosity with Dharma. Because we know there are three types of generosity: material generosity, generosity of love and kindness or protection, and generosity of Dharma. So when we explain things to others, this is generosity of Dharma. The next thing that will come following your faith, your ethics, your practice of generosity is that you will have a sense of shame and modesty. So a sense of shame comes when we actually compare ourselves to great teachers that we have, and we look at their qualities, how far more advanced they are from us, and we feel, great respect for them. We can feel their superiority in terms of their knowledge, of their quality, and so forth, and that sort of like put ourselves down a little bit. Also, we have a sense of modesty, of dignity, in the sense that we say, or if I were to act in this particular way, it would be inappropriate, it will cause this and this harm. So immediately on the spot, we can make these decisions. So we have a sense of decency straight away. As a result of this, we will develop wisdom. So in this way, based on our study, we develop what is known as the 7 riches of the Aryas. So these are, again, to enumerate them from study, will come number 1, faith, number 2, ethics, morality, anyway, we have, number 1, study, number 2, faith, number 3, ethics, number 4, generosity, number 5, shame, number 6, modesty or decency, and number 7, wisdom. So these are actually the 7 superior types of wealth that we develop. And as you can see, the second line of the verse that we mentioned, it says that study is the supreme wealth that cannot be carried away by the thieves. And it refers to those seven supreme wealth of the areas, those which are inequalities that no one can take away. And then finally, the third benefit of study that was given is that this study becomes a weapon that destroys the enemy of confusion. So eventually, with our study will become very powerful to the point of destroying all our ignorance and the imprints of ignorance so that we will reach the state of Buddhahood. But this study, for study to act in this way, it has to have certain characteristics. So it says study should be threefold. It should be, you should study from many teachers, meaning you don't just go to one teaching with one teacher, just one text and one teacher, and that's all. You receive teachings from many various teachers. The second characteristic is that you should study many times. So the more we study and the more study becomes a habit, the more we want to study more and more subjects, more times, and so forth. So study from many, study many times. And the third one is study with many, meaning study together with other students. So study that has these three characteristics, if you carry it out in this way, it becomes powerful enough to remove ignorance and all its imprints, leading for you to the state, becoming the state of an arhat, where you defeat all afflictions. Last one. So we have completed the first section, which is talking about the benefits of study. We continue with the second section, which is the proper way to listen to those teachings. So this is actually advice for the students who are receiving those teachings. So the best way to listen to the teachings is to abandon the unfavorable conditions, which are the three faults, and to listen with the favorable conditions, who are the 6 types of recognition. Those of you who have studied the Lamrim, and especially Lamrim Chenmo, you will find these subjects explained there in great detail. We will touch on those subjects here. So, because it's important to explain these points. So, as we say, the first one for the listener is to overcome the adverse conditions, and the adverse conditions are threefold. As the Buddha himself has said, the advice that we receive is listen well, thoroughly, and hold it into mind. So with these three phrases, he's actually talking about overcoming the three faults. The first fault that we have to overcome is the fault that is similar to being like a pot that is turned upside down. So this is exemplified by the word listen thoroughly, the word thoroughly. So when you have a pot that is turned upside down, it means nothing goes in, right? You do not receive anything. Nothing penetrates. So what will be the benefit of attending here for 2 hours if you're not really listening? The second one that says, hold it into, the second fault that we have to overcome is the fault of being like a pot that has a leaky bottom. If you have a leaky bottom, whatever you pour there is not retained. It goes to waste. And this is exemplified with the words, hold it into mind. Hold it into mind means remember it, retain it, do not forget it. Again, what benefit is it if today you receive some teachings, you study something, but tomorrow you forget it? And then tomorrow again you study another subject, and again the day after you have forgotten this. So if you do not retain any of this information, it's a waste of time. So you are here, let's say, for this class for 2 hours. If you're not listening, or if you're not going to retain any of this information, so these 2 hours, you could say, are wasted, right? You will not derive any benefit of this. And then we come to the third fault, which is like a filthy pot. And this needs to be avoided. This is demonstrated with the words listen well. So being like a filthy pot indicates having the wrong motivation. So imagine now that you have a pot, we have a container, which is facing the right way up, and also it is not leaking. So in that way, this is a container, this is a pot, which is suitable to serve food in this. But if inside that pot, you have some filthy, smelly, disgusting substance, straight away you think that I am not going to put any food in here. I'm not going to serve any food in this container. So this analogy of the filthy, smelly substance within the pot indicates that we have the wrong motivation. So in terms of motivation, again, very clearly explained in the Lam-Rim, there are different levels of motivation. And the best motivation is if you can think that I am here to listen to these teachings because I aspire to reach the state of Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. That will be the best motivation. If you cannot master this type of motivation, then let's say a middling type of motivation will be the thought that says that at least by coming into those teachings, for myself, I will be able to remove my afflictions, I will be able to remove my ignorance, and this will become the cause for my liberation. So that's a middling motivation, not the best, but still good enough. And finally, the least motivation we should have is that I am attending these teachings, I do this study, so that, I'm sorry, so that in my next, apologies, Konda, so that in my next life, I will not fall into the lower migrations. So this is the list of the motivations we should have. So very important here in terms of motivation is not to have a motivation that is preoccupied with this life. Because if we have a motivation preoccupied with the affairs of this life, then we are mixed with the 8 worldly dharmas, or we have the 8 worldly concerns. So, for example, you find people who are thinking, I want to receive all the transmissions of the various Lam-Rim texts, or I want to receive all these initiations, I want to receive all these Jenangs, because in this way I will become famous and powerful and I can have control over other people. This clearly is a motivation that is a motivation of influenced by the 8 worldly concerns. Actually, within this text, the separation from the 4 types of clinging, there is discussion of the 8 worldly concerns. So, to have when we attend these teachings, we need to set a motivation that says, I'm attending here with the intention to bring about great benefit. The most beneficial will be to think that I will reach the state of Buddhahood in order to benefit all other sentient beings. So with these thoughts, we adjust the motivation and avoid the 3 faults. Lesson, Katsuna. So the first thing is to stay away from the 3 faults. The second thing that we need to establish are the 6 attitudes. So to, first of all, to enumerate those is to think ourselves as the sick person. Second, to think of Dharma as the medicine. The third one is to think of the virtuous friend who explains the Dharma as a skilled physician. The fourth one is to think that our own earnest practice is the way to cure us from our illness. The fifth one is to think that the Tathagata is a holy being. And the sixth one is to think that the teachings will endure for a very long time. From those 6 attitudes, the first one, who sees ourselves as being the sick person, is the most important one. If we have this in place, the other 5 will follow naturally. So when we talk about illness, we need to recognize that there are actually 4 different types of illness. The first one is the physical illness, the one that which is a type of illness that we can overcome by going to the doctor and being prescribed some medicine, right? And we rely on the treatment and we recover from the physical ailment. The second type of illness is illness that we receive from other like non-human beings, demigods, and so forth. And these are a type of illness that we can overcome by doing different pujas and practices that can help us overcome this type of illness. The third type of illness that we have is illness that is the maturational result of karma that was left unpurified from our previous lives. All right. So it is very important. Sometimes we get ill in this life, and then we see that the medicine or the treatment that should work is actually not giving us the results or the benefits that we are expecting. In this case, we need to recognize, and also the pujas do not work very well, and so forth. In this case, we recognize that it is the third type of illness, that we're dealing with some residue of karma, so we have now the maturational result. And when this happens, it's very good to reflect that this is like a debt, a karmic debt. We experience this illness as a karmic debt that we have to repay. And lastly, we have the fourth type of illness. So until we become arhats, we will experience illness due to attachment, hatred, and confusion, due to the 3 poisons. So this is the type of illness that we need to overcome in this occasion. So we understand that the teachings, the Dharma teachings, are like the medicine that will clear away this illness that comes from afflictions. So this is the second recognition, that the Dharma is the medicine. Now, in order to overcome this type of illness, we need to understand that having an operation or having a vaccination or spending money in a health resort and so forth will not get rid of this 4th type of illness. The only thing that works, the only antidote, the only medicine is the Dharma. The next thing to understand is that as we run with this analogy of the patient and needing to rely on the doctor, that the person who is giving us the Dharma teachings is like the skilled physician. So what happens with the skilled physician is that they explain that you need to take this and this medicine, you take it in the morning, you take it in the afternoon, you should do this, you should avoid that. So they explain to us what we should do in order to get better. So very important here also to recognize that if we go against the doctor's advice, and if we do not follow any of these recommendations, we will not improve. But this will not be the fault of the doctor or the fault of the medicine, isn't it? It will be our own fault. Therefore, we need to recognize that now that I have received this explanation of Dharma, now it is up to me to practice and practice diligently. The teacher that I have who is teaching me giving me those excellent teachings, they have certain understanding and realizations as a result of their own study and practice. They can never transfer this realization from their mind into my mind. If I want to understand those things and if I want to develop if I want to develop, I need to put those things into practice. So this is the next recognition, which is thinking that our earnest, diligent practice is the way to cure our own illness. So these are the first 4 recognitions or thoughts that we have that are very important. Following that, the last two is to think that the Tathagata is a holy being. So it's very important here to develop faith towards the Buddha and see the Buddha as being a valid person who has all the teachings the Buddha has given are absolutely true. So this is having faith towards the Buddha. And the last one is thinking that the teachings will endure for a long time. We should think that due to my practice, these teachings will remain for a very long time. So these are the 6 recognition favorable conditions that we should have. So we have explained the proper way that those who receive the teachings should attend, and also we should explain the way that the teacher should engage in this activity of parting the teachings. So as the Abhidharma says, without your gift of Dharma being afflicted, teach the sutras and so forth purely as they are. So the important thing is the first line that says, without your gift of Dharma, meaning without your teachings, being afflicted, being influenced by afflictions. So the teacher who is teaching the students should not be thinking with the expectation or the great hope that they will receive gifts and offerings, or that they will receive service from the students, or that they will become famous, they will amass many students, and so forth. Sometimes the thought might occur that if I give these teachings, I will receive so many offerings. Or if I give these teachings, all these people will become my students. And in the future, let's say when I am sick or when I need something, I can call on their help and they will have to serve me. Or if I teach these people, the number of my students will increase and I will become very famous as being, a famous teacher who has so many students and so forth. When such thoughts influence the teacher, then what they communicate does not become the Dharma. It becomes an explanation, it becomes a speech, but it does not become Dharma teachings. So the proper way to teach is with the thought that says, I want to teach in order to benefit as much as possible those students without having any expectations or hopes for reward and gain and wealth and so forth. Okay, so these were the preliminaries, and we now begin with the actual part, which is the instruction. And again, within the actual part, it is customary that, first of all, we speak about the origin of these teachings. So in terms of the origins of the teachings, in the Sangha tradition, we have 5 patriarchs. From those 5 patriarchs, the third one was the Sachen Kunga Nyingpo. So when the third patriarch, Sachen Kunga Nyingpo, was 12 years old, he was advised by his teacher, Bari Lotsawa, to do the approximation retreat on Manjushri. He actually received the Jenang of Manjushri and the transmission of the mantra, and his teacher told him it was a good idea to do the approximation retreat. He did that approximation retreat for 6 months, and as a result of this, he had a direct vision of Manjushri. And when he directly saw Manjushri, Manjushri gave him those 4 lines that are known as the core verses of parting from the 4 clingings, which is, if you cling to this life, you are not a practitioner. If you cling to the 3 realms, that is not renunciation. If you cling to self-interest, you are not a bodhisattva. If grasping arises, it is not the view. So this is what we have from Sachen Kunga Nyingpo. And then we see that Jetsun Drakpa Gyaltsen actually composed a much longer text, because what Venerable Manjushri gave to Sachen Kunga Nimbo was just like 4 lines. But what Jetsun Drakpa Gyaltsen has done is he has composed a text that elaborates on those 4 lines and explains to us how we are to practice what each one of those verses. Actually, as we will see, they include quite a lot of practices. So the extensive text is from Jetsun Drakpa Gyaltsen. Okay, so Geshe, I would like to make a correction. We said that Sachen Kunka Nyingpo was the 3rd of the 5 patriarchs. He was actually the 1st of the 5 patriarchs, and then Drakpa Gyaltsen is the 3rd patriarch, was 3rd. So we begin with the actual verses of the text composed by Jetsun Drakpa Gyaltsen. The first verse that we have that says, "My teachers who are so kind, meditation deities so compassionate, to you I go for refuge from my heart. Pray, bestow your blessings upon me." This is a verse of homage, and as you see, he is addressing the Guru and the Yidam, going for refuge and requesting blessings. So the Guru here is the kind root Guru who is kind in 3 ways, and the Yidam is the special deity. He's addressing the Guru inseparable from the Yidam, and with a very strong feeling of reliance and respect. He says, "I go for refuge." And having gone for refuge in this way, he's requesting the blessings from the Guru. So he's requesting particular blessings here so that there will be no obstacles in presenting what was the initiation vase on my head and I received the blessing, or the water from the vase came in contact with my head and I received the blessings, or the Guru put the statue of the Yidam on the crown of my head and I received the blessings, and so forth. This is not how we actually receive the blessing. An indication of really receiving the blessing is that by relying on the instruction of the Guru and putting this into practice as instructed, we begin noticing that there is some shift, there is some improvement, and all the bad elements in our character, in our way of thinking, gradually begin to shift and improve. So if you see some improvement in the way that you think based on your practice through the instructions of the Guru, this is an indication that you have received the blessings of the Guru. So having a vase or having a statue, touching your body and so forth, that's not how the blessings of the Guru enter within you. Lasso. The second verse is a verse that is the pledge of composition. So the author is actually making the promise saying, I will compose or a text on this subject. I will speak. I will elucidate this particular subject. Conduct contrary to the teachings has no use. Thus, to act in accordance with the teachings, there is the instruction on parting from the 4 clingings. I offer this to your very ears. So first of all, he says, anything that goes against the Dharma, I have no use for that. So I'm going to cast all this aside. I'm going to put all this away. And he says to act in accordance with the teachings, meaning to have a pure practice. There is the instruction that came from Venerable Manjushri, and this is the instruction on parting from the 4 clingings. And he says, I will offer this, meaning I will offer those stages of practice of parting from the 4 clingings to your ears. So he's addressing the Lama and the Yidam, and he's saying, I have the intention to speak or to explain the stages of practice according to the instruction of Venerable Manjushri, how to part from the 4 clingings. Please listen to my presentation. So it indicates, please listen, if I make any mistake, please pay attention, correct me for that. Lasso. Then with the third verse, first line, which is the first parting, It says, if you cling to this life, you are not a practitioner. So very clearly, in brief, it says that if you engage in any activity influenced by the 8 worldly concerns, this activity, whether it is study, whether it is practice, whether it is puja, whatever it is, it does not become a Dharma practice. So as long as you are clinging, you're attached, you are engrossed into this life, any activity you do does not become Dharma. So the practice that you are doing should be influenced with the thought of achieving something beneficial, at least for the next life and beyond. The second line says, if you cling to the 3 realms, that is not renunciation. So it might be that we are free from attachment from this life. Nevertheless, we still have attachment for certain states within cyclic existence. So, for example, we could be practicing generosity and ethics and patience and so forth, thinking that as a result of this, I will get a rebirth as a god or a human. And if you are thinking in this way, your practice of ethics and generosity and patience and so forth, they only become causes for remaining within samsara. They do not become the causes of your liberation. You do not have renunciation if you're thinking, I'm practicing in order to get another good rebirth within samsara. You might practice ethics, and that will bring about the result of higher rebirth, a good rebirth. You might practice generosity, and that will become the cause for you in the future to have great wealth and resources. But it does not become the cause of renunciation. You have no renunciation if you're thinking in this way, and therefore it does not become the cause for your liberation. Lasso. So the third line, it says, if you cling to self-interest, you are not a bodhisattva. So it's saying here that it's very important in our practice to completely bash, to completely eliminate self-interest. We should not just be thinking that I'm practicing Dharma in order to achieve a higher rebirth for myself or in order to achieve liberation for myself. If you practice in this way, yes, we can say that this is the practice of Dharma. However, it is not pure Dharma. This is actually the practice of the lesser vehicle. So it is very important to think that what I'm practicing here is because I want to establish virtue in order to reach the state of Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. So it is very important to be influenced by bodhicitta and compassion. But unless we let go of that self-interest, it is impossible to be influenced by bodhicitta and by compassion. And in that sense, although what we practice becomes a path, becomes a dharma, is actually a mistaken path. It is not the Mahayana path. So by letting go of self-interest and by being very clear that all the virtue and all the Dharma practice that we do is for the sake of reaching Buddhahood, in order to benefit sentient beings, we ensure that we have the correct path. It is pure practice of Dharma, and it is influenced by bodhicitta and compassion. The last line says, if grasping arises, it is not the view. So here in terms of grasping, we have 2 types of grasping at the identity of the individual and grasping at the identity of phenomena, dharmas, other than the individual. So in terms of grasping, first of all, there is grasping at I. So this notion of I is cultivated by looking at our aggregates and grasping at them as being I, the self. Then, independence on this, we start talking about my hands, my legs, my possessions, and so forth. So then is grasping at mine, that which belongs to me. Grasping at I and grasping at mine are the 2 types of grasping that are developed in this order. So we see that we have grasping based on the contaminated appropriated aggregates, and also grasping at phenomena that are other than our contaminated aggregates. And for as long as we have these two types of grasping, we do not generate the wisdom of selflessness that overcomes grasping. So the aim of our study and our practice is to develop the wisdom realizing emptiness. Emptiness here is understood as the lack of inherent existence. Without the wisdom realizing selflessness, we will not be able to obtain the state of liberation. We will not be able to obtain the state of Buddhahood. And the reason for that is that without this type of wisdom realizing selflessness, we do not have the antidote to eliminate afflictions. Therefore, for as long as we have the two types of grasping, we cannot generate the correct view. If we do not have the correct view, if we do not have realization of selflessness, we will not be able to overcome afflictions, ignorance, and their imprints, and therefore we will not be able to achieve our goals. And this is what the fourth line says. If grasping arises, any of the two types of grasping, then this is not the view of emptiness. Last song. Actually, when we look at these four lines, the four partings, so there's another way of presenting this that is very useful. So the first one that says, if you cling to this life, you are not a practitioner. So it urges us to give up clinging into this life. And if we do this, our mind turns into Dharma. So the first one is advice on how to turn your mind into Dharma. The second line says, if you cling to the three realms, meaning to cyclic existence, that is not renunciation. So this is advice on how to make the Dharma become the path. The third line says, if you cling to self-interest, you are not a bodhisattva. And this is advice on how to overcome. Now you have a path, but it's a mistaken path. So it's advice of how to overcome the mistaken path. And the last one that says, if grasping arises, it is not the view, it is advice for the sake of generating the realization of the meaning of dependent origination, which is the meaning of emptiness, the lack of inherent existence, being devoid of the four extremes. So it's very good to keep that in mind. So the four instructions that we get is how to turn your mind into Dharma, how to turn the Dharma into the path, how to make the path unmistaken path, and how to generate realization of dependent origination as the lack of inherent existence. Last one. So again, if we look at those four lines, we can actually see the connection with the presentation that we have in the Lam Rim. So the first one, it says, if you cling to this life, you're not a practitioner. So it's advised not to cling in this life. And this includes instructions on how to practice by considering how this body, which is the precious human rebirth with all the freedoms and endowments, is very meaningful, and it is very difficult, very rare to find. Then how to consider death and impermanence, then how to go for refuge, how to think about the law of cause and effect. And therefore, this includes all these subjects of the practice that is shared with the individual of the small scope. Because if you consider all these subjects, this actually helps you to be detached from clinging to this life. So that's for the first line. Now we come to the second line that says, if you cling to the three realms, that is not renunciation. So here, of course, we might consider the suffering of the three lower migrations. And although we're thinking that I might be reborn as a god or a human, who is a much better type of rebirth, even being reborn in one of the higher migrations, since this type of rebirth is established due to the power of karma and afflictions, still we're not in control. We do not have freedom. And still we experience suffering. So at this point, we have to consider what are the causes of suffering. So in other words, what is the origin of suffering? So the origin of suffering is two. It is affliction and karma. As long as we have the afflictions, these will make us to act in a way that will cause us to accumulate this negative karma. And therefore, we have to consider what are the methods of overcoming this, the origin of all the suffering. And the method of overcoming it is meditating on the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths, such as, for example, impermanence and so forth. So all of this actually falls under the presentation of the path that is shared with the individual of the middle scope. If you meditate on these subjects, you will overcome clinging for samsara. So you will overcome clinging to the three realms. Lasso. We'll continue with the third line that says, if you cling to self-interest, you are not a bodhisattva. So obviously, if you still have self-interest, you do not have bodhicitta. There are, as you all know, there are two different ways to train in order to generate mind generation or bodhicitta in our mind stream. For those who have dull faculties, it is advised that they follow the 7-point cause and effect method. For those who have sharp faculties, it is said that from the very beginning they can engage the training of equalizing and exchanging self for others. So by engaging this type of training, they will be able to generate, a practitioner is able to generate the great vehicle, uncontrived bodhicitta. And this is actually a path that is uncommon. It is unique to the great vehicle. Whilst the previous types of paths were described as shared, this one is unshared, is uncommon. And following that, we need to generate the wisdom realizing selflessness. Now, the wisdom realizing selflessness is a path that is shared. But what we aim to achieve with this wisdom is to overcome afflictive obscurations as well as knowledge obscurations. So if this type of wisdom is not influenced by bodhicitta, it does not have the power to become the antidote to knowledge obscurations. Therefore, if we want our wisdom to eliminate both afflictive and knowledge obscurations, it must be influenced by bodhicitta. And therefore, even the presentation of wisdom here becomes the unique Mahayana presentation. So we need to generate that wisdom that overcomes grasping at the identity of the person and phenomena. So as you can see here, we are talking about a combination or a union of method and wisdom. Through the different aspects of method, we build up our accumulation of merit, and during our practice of wisdom, we build up our accumulation of wisdom. And the combination of these two accumulations of merit and wisdom becomes the unmistaken path, the unique and unmistaken path that leads to the state of Buddhahood. That is a state that gives us the capacity to fulfill our own purpose and the purpose of others. And therefore, as you can see here with those 4 lines, we have the presentation of the 3 scopes of practice and also the presentation of the full method of the full union of method and wisdom that leads to the state of Buddhahood. Lasso, Tijana. Close. Okay, so Geshe, I would like to give the opportunity to the students to ask a question. Ideally, it should be a question that is related to this subject that we have just covered. But of course, it might be the case that you have an unrelated question, something that bothers you, something that an issue that you want to bring up. So Geshe says if it is within my capacity, if it is within my knowledge to give an answer, I will give you the answer to your question. Sometimes, of course, it is possible that I cannot address all the questions that you ask. So keep that in mind. So yes, we're open for questions.
Okay, Sheila, thank you for your teaching. I have a question about karma.
Please speak up. I can hardly hear you.
I have a question about karma.
Karma.
Yes. I'll speak slowly so you can interpret. Does karma have compounding interest? Meaning, okay, I will illustrate my point. So there are some karma which would manifest itself immediately in this lifetime. That means if you do something bad, it will show up immediately. Like something bad will come back to you this lifetime. But some of the karma will only come many lifetimes later. So does that mean that those that will manifest much later in Aeon's lifetime is more serious compared to the one that instantly comes back to you? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so question about karma. So we say that some karma we experience immediately in this life, and there is some karma that we might experience many lifetimes from now. So if that karma that we experience in many lifetimes from now, is this an indication that it is more serious? Was the karma that we experience in this life is kind of like lighter, not as heavy? Yes? Is this your question? Okay, so when we talk about karma in terms of when it is experienced, we have karma that will be experienced in this life. We have karma that will be experienced in the life immediately after this one. We have karma that will be experienced in many lifetimes in the future. And then we have karma that is uncertain. So we need to talk a little bit to explain the last one. Karma that is uncertain means although you have accumulated the karma, like you did the deed, you acted in a particular way, you do not have the complete accumulation. So some of the elements that make karma complete is missing. So maybe you didn't have the motivation in place, maybe you didn't have the preparation, maybe you didn't do the proper dedication, maybe you didn't apply yourself thoroughly to the activity. So if some of these elements are missing, it means that although you carry the activity, you will not experience the result. And in that sense, it is uncertain. So that one, the last one, the fourth, we have to say is the lightest because it will not be experienced. So moving backwards, the first one in the list, the one that we will experience in this life, is the heaviest. The one that we experience in the immediate next life is intermediate weight. And then the one that we will experience in many lifetimes is a bit lighter. Yes.
Other questions? Yeah, Ling.
Yeah, Sheila, thank you for the teaching. I have not a question. I wish that you can elaborate on the 16 aspect of the Four Noble Truths.
All right, so the Buddha has actually taught the Four Noble Truths, starting with the truth of origin. Then the second one is the truth of suffering, the truth of the path, and the truth of cessation. So first of all, in terms of the origin, we have mentioned today there are two types of fault, karma and affliction. So everything begins with the afflictions, and the affliction here refer to the different types of self-grasping, grasping at phenomena and grasping at the person, the individual. So grasping at the individual here is this constant me, this idea, grasping at me, grasping at the self. So to give you an example of this type of grasping that comes automatically into our mind, if I were to have a fall and fall into the ground, right? What actually falls into the ground is my body. But at that time, I do not have the thought saying my body fell to the ground. Instead, I have the thought that says I fell down to the ground. And that is because we don't make the separation, or we do not recognize that the I is merely imputed upon the aggregate of the body. So without making this distinction, we just say I fell into the ground. And this is just an example to show how we identify with everything. And therefore, everything is I, grasping at the I. And once we have this grasping at the I, we have ideas about what we would like to experience in terms of what would bring us pleasure, what would bring us comfort, and so forth. And when things do not turn out this way, then of course anger and hostility and competitiveness and so forth arise towards others. So this is how the fundamental mistake gives rise to afflictions, and then this causes us to engage in karma. And this karma and affliction are the origin, the beginning. They bring about suffering. And the way that we identify suffering, what is suffering? Suffering is our contaminated, appropriated aggregates. And then after that, we have a path. And by following the path, we will reach the state of cessation. So there are actually 4 noble truths, but for each one of the 4 noble truths, we can identify 4 aspects. Now, these 4 aspects are just you could say, different functions of each one of the 4 noble truths. So because we have 4 noble truths, we have 4 aspects for each truth, we end up with 16 aspects. So I'm just going to read you the list here because I have not memorized it. So for the truth of the first one, the truth of origin, it's not phenomena, miserable phenomena, void phenomena, and phenomena lacking an impossible self. The second one, the truth of the origin, it has the aspects of cause, origin, strong production, and condition. The third one, the truth of cessation, has stopping, pacification, superior states, and definite emergence. And the fourth noble truth, which is the truth of the path, is path, appropriate means of practice, and means of definite removal. So for each one of the 4 truths, we have 4 aspects, ending in 16s.
Any other questions? Okay, so we have a question here from one of our online friends, because we also have friends from overseas joining. Geshe talked about grasping at I and the grasping at mine. And both of these relate to ignorance or afflictions. How about the self-grasping attitude? Does this attitude arise due to the grasping at the I, the grasping at the mine? Is this attitude something that we need to eliminate as part of the method?
Okay, so we talked about the grasping at I and mine, which is the main grasping that we have. And then we talked about self-grasping in the sense of self-cherishing, which is, this idea of myself being very important. The thing is that if we can eliminate grasping at I and mine, this will help us reduce the self-grasping, or the idea that we are very important. But of course, the stronger that we have grasping at I and mine, the more difficult it will be to reduce this idea of self-cherishing, of being very important. So this idea is, for example, when you feel very strong anger or when you feel very strong fear, you can have this notion of I appearing quite strongly into your mind. And at this time, it appears that there is an I that is independent. Independent here, it means it does not rely on the basis of designation. It does not depend or rely on anything else. So obviously, the stronger this notion is, the more exaggerated your sense of importance will be. However, if we completely eradicate self-grasping, it doesn't necessarily mean that automatically you eradicate your self-cherishing as well. But it is something, it will be improved, it will become